Hey everybody, welcome to Jacob's Quest, and last night I got a chance to see Spider-Man No Way Home. This is going to be a full spoiler review, and yeah, obviously, if you haven't watched this movie, go watch it. Don't let me sit here and talk blindly about all the crazy stuff that happened and ruin this movie for you, so please, go watch it. And yeah, the other thing is that so much stuff happened in this movie that, to be honest with you, if I tried to go into every little detail, we would be here for over an hour. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna try and go through the big things that happen. So I'm not gonna do like a step by step of everything that happened in the plot. Okay, so here we go. First of all, you know, if you've seen the trailers, you know the gist of the plot, why it happens, how it happens, right? But when the bad guys are coming through, what we figure out really is the reason this is able to happen is because not only the spell goes wrong, but Doctor Strange has contained this spell inside this little prism, and basically if this spell explodes, if it gets out, it's going to rip open the multiverse. And really what it's doing is that it's trying to bring over every single person across the multiverse, the infinite multiverse, that knows that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. And essentially what happened is that before he was able to contain it, a couple of people, squeezed through his little spell, and that is how you have your Doc Ock and Green Goblin, Electro, etc., right? And essentially at first Spider-Man is just rounding these guys up, thinking, okay, we're just gonna send them back home, that's what's best for them. And as he's doing that, he soon finds out that actually no, a lot of these people are gonna end up dying. Half of them at least die the second they come back. And Doctor Strange is kind of cold about it. He probably could have handled this better. He's like, well, that's their fate, that's what they're supposed to do. In the grand calculus of the of the multiverse, of the omniverse or whatever, their deaths mean more than their lives or something like that, which I'm like, Doctor Strange, how did you think Peter was going to react to you saying it that way? You could have said it some gentler way, instead of being like, oh, their lives don't matter, which, I mean, come on, of course he's going to react this way. But it's really because of Aunt May, who had at some point run into Norman Osborn. So basically what happened is Green Goblin shows up on the bridge for a second, Spider-Man gets teleported away, and then sometime later Norman Osborn shows up to Aunt May's it's feast. It's like their charity place that they had set up in the last movie. Basically he shows up there and he just tells her the truth. It's like, yeah, there's I need help. There's like this other voice in my head. I came from a different universe. And so basically through Norman and through Aunt May, Peter becomes convinced that, like, okay, we can't just send these people back. We have to try to help them, cure them, or something, in order so that way when they do get sent back, they won't be villains, or at the very least they won't be like these giant supernatural threats that have to be stopped, so they don't have to die, basically. And that's basically why he runs off with Doctor Strange's magical box that would have sent them home. And this box plays like a key thing throughout the whole movie, because it's essentially, with a push of a button, they could send all these bad guys home at any time, really. But they don't do that because, he becomes like set on this mission of helping them and then sending them back. Whereas some other characters like Sandman, for example, his motivation is he just wants to go back. He's not even a villain in this one, which I was curious how they would handle some of these villains, because as we saw in Spider-Man 3, Sandman, not really a bad guy. He wants money to help his sick daughter. But in this one, he's like, I just want to get home. I just want to get home to my daughter. She's sick. She needs me. He's not like out there trying to, rule a new universe like Green Goblin is, but he does end up siding with the bad guys because he's trying to also chase down Spider-Man and get that box, because he probably just wants to press the button and go home. But yeah, this is where Spider-Man, in his attempt to help everyone, he ends up taking them to this little apartment that they're now staying in because, you know, everyone found out who he was. They end up staying in this little apartment. It's like a safe house that's also somewhat of a storage room for Stark tech. You know, it's essentially the same thing that made his suit. It's like this little cabinet you can open up that can just generate generally everything that Stark tech could do, and this is where Electro gets his arc reactor, and they do manage to fix Doc Ock. So that was one thing. So there's that beginning bridge fight with Doc Ock where he is still a bad guy, but they managed to fix him. They create a new chip for the back of his neck, and so they managed to, you know, basically he's a good guy from here on out. Now, he doesn't show up again until the end of the movie, which I thought was a little strange, you know. And this movie's kind of filled with little things like that, where it's like, okay, this character is here for the beginning of the movie, and then they get kind of quickly disposed of, and they don't show up again until the third act. That same thing happens with Doctor Strange. You know, when Peter's trying to get the box from him, he ends up trapping Doctor Strange in his own mirror dimension, which, you know, I guess for plot reasons, they're like, okay, well, Doctor Strange he can't just be here trying to fix things because we need Spider-Man to go through his own journey. So they had to kind of get rid of him. And the same thing happens with Doc Ock, where it's like, okay, well, he's a good guy now. He helps him fight for like a second, and then he'll show up again in the third act because we have a lot of other stuff that we need to do. Speaking of the villains, the other thing is that there are at least a couple of logical inconsistencies that, you know, well, going into this movie, I was convinced that these are, you know, while these are the same actors and visually looking very similar to the Raimi films and the Mark Webb films, I do not believe that these are meant to be exact, literal, those versions. I think these are variants, and my reason was that, you know, well, Electro looks different, you know, stuff like that, right? He appears different in the trailers, so maybe this is a variant. Maybe this isn't literally that same one. They do seem to try to work with the implication that these are literally the same exact versions. The problem is that they do things like, for example, when Peter is just finding out that, oh, all of us die and Green Goblin dies, Doc Ock says something like, oh yeah, it was all over the newspapers. Green Goblin got stabbed with his own glider, and he was Norman Osborn. The only problem, of course, is that Doc Ock is taken moments before he dies. You know, that Norman Osborn being Green Goblin was not public knowledge. You know, what newspaper was publishing that? Because that was not known at all. Spider-Man took Norman Osborn's body and brought it back to the house, and the whole Harry Osborn thing was that he didn't know his dad was Green Goblin until the end of that second movie. So, you know, there's like little logical things where it's like, okay, we need someone to tell Peter that, oh yeah, Norman Osborn dies. So if you see him, you're coming across a ghost. He's supposed to be dead. We're all supposed to be dead, you know? So there's like little things like that where it's like, okay, you just, for the sake of the plot, I guess you just gotta go with it. You know, it doesn't annoy me really. It's just like a little thing that I noticed in the theater. I was like, oh, I don't know how he would know that information, but okay, sure, why not? But anyways, so Spider-Man is trying to help all the bad guys, and they end up turning on him. Of course they do, right? So, you know, people like Electro and Green Goblin end up being like, you know what? We don't want help. We're just gonna be evil and rule this place, you know. And Green Goblin was just pretending to be Norman Osborn, just to play on Peter and May's sympathies for helping people. And yeah, like you saw in the trailer, Green Goblin ends up bombing the Feast headquarters, and this is really where we get our first like dark turn of the movie. Was like, you kind of got the feeling someone's gonna die in this movie. Something horrible's gonna happen in such a major event. And of course, yeah, the building gets bombed. Aunt May is there trying to protect Peter, and Peter's like, no, run, Aunt May, get out of here. And unfortunately, yes, Aunt May gets hit with the Green Goblin glider, and then the building explodes. And at first it seems like she's fine, she stands up and they have a conversation, and this is where she even gives the line about great power comes with great responsibility and all that. And then I couldn't exactly tell where she was bleeding from, but she collapses, and then he looks at his hands like, oh no, she's bleeding, and then Aunt May is gone, which is crazy, and as we kind of establish a little bit later with some other characters we'll talk about, this is essentially Aunt May becoming this version of Spider-Man's Uncle Ben, because she gave the line and then she died, and then it becomes like his whole motivating thing of like revenge versus helping people, and this is now essentially his Uncle Ben. I think a lot of us were kind of basically taking it that like, oh, I guess Tony Stark is his Uncle Ben, because Tony Stark died. But now it's like, okay, no, this is his Uncle Ben. This is the person that raised him and then taught him a lesson and then died. And then, here we go. So yeah, that was crazy, and it was sad, and so oof. Oh, I was gonna bring something up, again, I'm not, oh, here it is. Earlier in the movie, I glossed way over this, but when everyone finds out that he's Spider-Man and he has all these legal troubles for a second, he hires Matt Murdock, who is Charlie Cox, who shows up from the Netflix shows, and yeah, he's only in there for one scene. He doesn't affect the plot in any way. It's a really quick cameo. He does catch a brick that was thrown through Spider-Man's apartment, but it's cool that he's back, and obviously we just got Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin back through the Hawkeye show, so that's cool. And I don't know who else they're gonna bring back from the Netflix shows, but yeah, this is not a Matt Murdock that came because of the Doctor Strange spell. This is before that happened, so basically this is definitely the MCU's version of Matt Murdock. This is not some other universe or anything like that. And yeah, it's a cool quick cameo, and like I said, it doesn't affect the plot at all. He doesn't show up later and help, which I guess that would have been cool, but some other time. there's a lot of stuff going on, so I get it was a good call to just have that be a really quick thing and then it's over. Anyways, back to the thing. So yeah, all the bad guys break out, Aunt May dies, and Spider-Man's crazy sad, and his friends are trying to find him. Ned had managed to grab Doctor Strange's sling ring, his little portal opening ring, and he tries to open a portal to find Peter Parker, and of course steps out Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. So yes, they're both in it. They have funny interactions with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, trying to get him to prove okay, how do we know you're Peter Parker? How do we know you're Spider-Man? Because you're not our Peter Parker. And so they have a funny moment where he has to get the cobwebs off of a ceiling because Ned's grandma was like, hey, can you clean up there while you're up there? And then they try it again, and of course in steps in Tobey Maguire, who's not in a spider suit. They make it, Andrew Garfield makes a joke about how he's dressed like a cool youth pastor. The other thing is that they did not de-age these two. Both of these Spider-Men are, I guess, pretty much the age that they would have aged in their own universes. So they're not de-aged. They're not he's not looking like he's from Spider-Man 2 Tobey Maguire. It's no, this is 2021's Tobey Maguire, or I guess 2024. I think that's the year in the MCU. Anyways, so they're all noticeably older, but that also means that they've all kind of been down their own paths, and they kind of have these lessons to bestow upon a younger Peter Parker. But yeah, there's just a lot of funny interactions where Tobey Maguire steps out and they both web each other, and just I think for their interactions alone, all the Spider-Man's interactions, that's worth the price of the ticket. Just that alone, that could have been the whole movie and I would have been happy, because it was just constant little jokes and references, and sometimes they'd say the same lines from their own movies, and it was great. It was just really great. But yeah, they basically, all the Spider-Men get together and they start okay, we're gonna, instead of just trying to defeat these bad guys, we're gonna try to cure them, and then we'll they'll come, and then we'll send them back, and then they shouldn't have to die. Now, this does kind of, this being the plan, it does kind of make me wonder. It's like, okay, so if these are supposed to be literally the versions from the past movies, does this mean the events of those movies are now being retcons because those, suddenly they disappear and then reappear without their villain powers? Like Electro seemingly would disappear and then reappear with no electricity, because that's the plan that they're going with. But yeah, just even more fun interactions. They're in the high school lab, and they're coming up with different devices that would cure each of the villains of the things that are wrong with them. And it's just a really, really fun sequence. Just the whole thing, everything about it. So much of it happens that it'd be hard to break it all down, but man, like I said, just that's worth the price of the ticket alone. Just seeing these scenes with all of them hanging out, and they're all being scientists, and they're all they kind of go over like, oh yeah, my Gwen died, and Toby's like, oh yeah, well, don't give up on having a relationship. Me and my MJ, we made it work. And so we kind of get small glimpses as to what happened years after their movies ended, which was pretty cool. I would have liked to have even more of that, obviously, but this is not their movie. They're just, they're guest appearances. They're not, we're not here to sit down and break down everything that happened in their lives after their movies ended. But it was pretty cool to get small little hints as to the direction they all went. And then they all basically go to the Statue of Liberty, and there's this huge fight, and they're one by one, they kind of bicker for a moment, but they try to, they try to work together to target one bad guy at a time and cure them. I will say, as far as the bad guys go, Sandman and Lizard, as I suspected, were mostly in their CGI forms. They were in their lizard and sand forms for pretty much like 99% of the movie, and you don't see them in human form until the very end, until they're cured. And even then, I'm pretty sure it's just like stock footage that they took from the other movies and used that as their human forms. So I kind of suspected that would be the case, and they definitely did not get as much attention as the other villains did. But like I said, Doc Ock comes back, and he actually ends up saving the day for a second. He helps defeat Electro, and then Doctor Strange ends up coming back at the last second, and all the the spell that they had contained inside the box, it ends up getting exploded because there was a goblin bomb in there. And so Doctor Strange has to try and contain all of these portals opening up, and inside of these portals you see the silhouettes of figures like the Rhino, and I'm sure many others that you would have to pause and look at the silhouettes and try to see who is who. But you get little hints of all these other things coming through. And there is a pretty crazy fight between Tom Holland's Spider-Man and the Green Goblin at the end, because of course he's responsible for Aunt May's death, and he's beating the crap out of Green Goblin, and he grabs the glider, and he's about to literally murder the Green Goblin, but Tobey Maguire steps in and saves him. He grabs the glider, and he kind of wrestles it away from Tom Holland, and then of course Green Goblin stabs Tobey Maguire in the back, and they end up being able to cure Green Goblin. They stab him in the neck with this cure that they have for the goblin stuff, and he's quickly like, whoa, what have I done, what happened? Now luckily Tobey Maguire, he didn't die, he's fine. He's like, oh, I've been stabbed before, which they could have killed Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man off. I think it would have upset a lot of people, but also it would have him dying at the hands of Green Goblin, it would have made sense. I will say this though, Tobey Maguire and Green Goblin don't really get any kind of interaction, which I think is a little bit of a missed opportunity. It feels like he would have had something to say to Norman Osborn. He gets interactions with Doc Ock and a little bit of an interaction with Sandman, which, hey, that was really nice. But him and Norman Osborn don't get any kind of confrontation with each other, you would think that Tobey Maguire would want to, say something to him, like, Norman, something, but no, not really. They don't really talk at all, which it's a little bit of a shame. So as much as this movie gave us, there are still at least a couple little things like that I'm like, okay, I wish we could have gotten this, and I wish we could have gotten that, but it's okay. Ultimately, we got so much. I'm not really complaining. We do get the moment where MJ's falling, and as many suspected, Andrew Garfield is the one that saves her, and he kind of, when they're safely on the ground, she's like, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "Yep." He's kind of getting teary-eyed, kind of like, because he brought up Gwen earlier, and now that he was able to, save, a Gwen, a MJ, it kind of like brought a little bit of closure. He was able to forgive himself. He's like, I can never forgive myself for not saving Gwen. So, in a sort of symbolic sense, he was able to, like, okay, he saved Gwen this time, in quotes, obviously. Gwen, and yeah, basically they defeat all the bad guys. Doctor Strange is like, I can't close this portal, and Spider-Man's like, well, what if everyone forgot that Spider-Man was Peter Parker? What if everyone forgot? And that's essentially what they do, is the Avengers and Ned and MJ and every single person will forget that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. So they're not messing with time at all. And he's not going to another dimension, which I thought for sure Sony was going to try to do. I thought Sony was going to be like, okay, this is our chance to get Spider-Man back for sure. But no, this Spider-Man is still in the MCU, which I'm happy about. But what they've essentially done is they've taken away all of his resources. So he doesn't have access to, Stark Industries labs and safe houses, and he doesn't know Happy Hogan. And seemingly everyone, even Nick Fury, will forget who Spider-Man is. They know there is a Spider-Man. That's still in the news, that like Spider-Man's still running around. We just don't know who he is. We don't know his identity, So we're in an interesting place now, where basically, he even tries to go talk to MJ, but he decides, he figures out that, they are going to the college they wanted to go to, that they were not being allowed in because of the controversy of knowing the potential murderer Spider-Man, So basically he makes the decision of like, I'm gonna... I'm just gonna let you live your lives. Your lives are better without knowing me. They're less complicated, they're less dangerous, and so he just kind of makes that decision to be like, to not say anything, and just let the spell work. And so yeah, he's basically he goes and rents a crappy apartment, which it looks a lot like the Tobey Maguire apartment. I couldn't be for sure that it's actually the same layout, but it looks very similar. It looks like a really small, kind of crappy New York apartment. And yeah, he makes himself a new suit, which is pretty shiny. I kind of want to get a better look at his new suit. It looks much more closer to like the classic Spider-Man look, which he was obviously inspired by the other Spider-Man and their costumes to like kind of give himself a new look. But yeah, so we have a Spider-Man in the MCU who essentially has no resources anymore. He doesn't have Aunt May or his friends or MJ, and he doesn't have Stark Tech, which that is one thing. He still had his original, he still had the red and black Stark Tech suit, which should still have AI in there, correct? I don't know. They didn't like say for sure that he like got rid of that suit, or he didn't just like mess with it a little to make it look more like classic Spider-Man, but I got the implication that he doesn't have the AI Stark Tech suit anymore. So we're saying, basically what they've done is they've looked at all of the criticisms that different fans have given these movies over the years about how he's too reliant on Iron Man stuff, and he's like Iron Boy Jr. or whatever. And they've essentially taken all that stuff away. So now he's just Spider-Man. He's poor. He's on his own. And that seems to be where they're leaving this for now. I don't know. They said there's a Spider-Man movie in the works for, that's already in the works. But again, some of Tom Holland's comments make it seem like he's done with this. I don't know what to think. I honestly don't know what to think at this point, because one minute it's like, oh no, Tom Holland's in Spider-Man and for 3 more movies he's fine, and then the next minute Tom Holland's like, oh, I kind of want to be done with this. I kind of, you know, I want to do something else and not act anymore or whatever. So I don't know when the next time we're going to see Spider-Man is, but this is where we're leaving him off. He's kind of on his own, you know. So it all, you know, and that kind of goes with the Spider-Man thing of like all this responsibility and doing the right thing. It does come at a cost, you know, and his cost was that he lost everything, really. He's just on his own now. He has to use his own resources. He doesn't, you know, he doesn't have access to anything. And no one knows who he is. No one knows who Peter Parker is. Now, I'm assuming that he still has a social security number, that he still has, like, you know, on file, he still has like a graduation certificate or something from high school, you know, stuff like that. Yeah, really interesting. Also, there are 2 post-credit scenes. The first of which, you know, this one is also kind of a logical kind of, so basically we go back up with Eddie Brock from the Venom movies, and if you saw Venom 2 at the end credits, you know that he was transported to a different dimension, and that's where the post credits of Venom 2 left off. And so we reach back there, and he is at a bar talking to the bartender, who's telling him all about Iron Man and the Hulk and how this universe has all these different superheroes. And it's just Eddie Brock in the Venom voice kind of going like, what? That's crazy. This doesn't make any sense. Here, we got to get out of here. And then magically they're teleported back to their own universe, much like all the other villains were. And what they leave behind is a tiny piece of black symbiote that you see move for a second, which of course plants the seeds of like, okay, somewhere on Earth, wherever this hotel was, there is a black symbiote that Tom Holland's Spider-Man could still come across, and that could be a whole thing. So there you go. Now we have a Venom in his own universe who was just sent back, and a little bit of Venom symbiote in the MCU now, which is pretty cool. The only thing about this, of course, is that the spell was supposed to only bring people over across the multiverse who knew that Spider-Man was Peter Parker. So why was Eddie Brock brought over? Seemingly in the Eddie Brock universe, there is no Peter Parker, there is no Spider-Man, so, you know, like, why was he brought over? That doesn't really make any sense, you know. And these are the kinds of things where it's like, okay, look, Doc Ock had no way of knowing that Norman Osborn was Green Goblin, and yet seemingly he just knows. And same thing with Venom. Why was he brought over? That's not even how the spell we were told works, right? That's not, you know. But for the sake of having a Venom symbiote in the MCU, you just go with it. You just like, okay, whatever, fine. You know, there's so much magic happening. There's so many different plot lines happening. I'm happy with a little bit of Venom being in the MCU. So whatever, he showed up. It's fine. It doesn't matter. It's fine. The second post-credit scene. Now this is one that I am hoping they release, that way I can really, you know, react to it and break it down and look at it again, because this is a little teaser for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. And you know, I don't want to like sit here and describe everything that happened in the teaser, because I'm hoping they release it. You know, I have to imagine they will pretty soon. So yeah, when they release it, then we will talk about it, then we'll break it down. But yeah, it is a little teaser for Multiverse of Madness, so that's pretty cool. And yeah, I guess this all just kind of leaves off with like, we know Spider-Man is supposed to show up in the MCU for an Avengers crossover or whatever, at least one more. Like, that's what we were told just last week, is that like, yeah, he's supposed to show up in the MCU movie at least one more time, right? But now no one knows who he is. So his identity as Peter Parker is a secret. Even people like Nick Fury should not know who he is, which is really interesting, because in a way it almost, it doesn't necessarily feel like they're taking away all the progress that he made in the last couple movies, but it does feel like, okay, so, you know, he had a whole relationship with Tony Stark, and obviously, you know, Tony's gone, but people like Pepper Potts and Happy Hogan, they have no idea who this kid is anymore, you know. And so it's kind of like he really did lose everything, you know. It's like he's the only one who remembers knowing these people and working with the Avengers and having best friends and, you know, all this stuff. So, you know, it ends on a little bit of a sad note, and when you really break it down, you're like, oh my god, everything's just gone now. All this, you know, all these good times that we had in the last couple of movies, that's just kind of over now. And now I really know what they mean when they said they were trying to think of this as the end of that trilogy, because it's like, yeah, his life is like vastly different now that he's all alone, really, you know. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't know when we'll see another Spider-Man in the MCU, but he's still here. He's still Spider-Man. He's just he's gonna have to operate a lot more difficultly now, and a lot more lonely. So we'll see what ends up happening with this, because basically now from this point on, he's gonna have to reintroduce himself to every single person he comes across. So in the next, you know, in the next crossover, if he comes across Winter Soldier or Falcon, he's gonna have to be like, oh, I know you guys, but you don't know me because you forgot all about that, I guess. Or at least you forgot that I was Peter Parker. Huh, weird. Okay, you know, so it's gonna be stuff like that. I don't know. But ultimately, I really like this movie. It was really enjoyable. They gave us a lot of fan service. They gave us a lot of moments that we wanted. There were still a couple things, like, you know, I would have liked to see Tobey Maguire Spider-Man and Norman have a moment, and they didn't really. They didn't have any kind of interaction at all. They do establish, though, that there's no Oscorp in the MCU. You know, Norman says that. He's like, yeah, I came here, there's no Oscorp, there's no Harry Osborn. So you know, those were some lingering questions we kind of had of like, you know, is the MCU, do they have their own version of this stuff? And no, they don't. But they do have their own Matt Murdock, because again, he showed up before the spell was cast, so he's just their version of Matt Murdock, and that's pretty cool. That's pretty exciting. And now we have, of course, a black symbiote, at least a tiny bit of it, which I'm sure it'll grow on its own. That now Tom Holland can attack him, and he can become Black Suit Spider-Man and do the whole thing. And yeah, man, just the interactions between the three Spider-Men, it's amazing. It's just, you know, when Toby and Tom Holland are talking about how, like, oh yeah, I fought an alien, I went to space and fought an alien, and then Andrew Garfield's like, oh, I fought a Russian guy in a mech suit, as a rhino suit. Oh, you know, and he's like, oh, I'm lame, and Toby's like, no, you're not lame. Hey, come on. You know, and they, my God, these interactions are just ridiculous. I will say this: Tobey Maguire is still. He's still the most nerdy of all the Peter Parkers, and now that he's older, it just comes across as like, oh, he's even more awkward now, because he does not know how to act cool at all, and he's not really much of a quippy guy. You know, like, he says some quips, but he's not really that kind of character. He's just really nerdy, and you can tell he's older now, so he's just got like this dad energy to him, and it's just like the funniest thing. And Andrew Garfield was like the comedic Spider-Man in this one. You know, he was the one that was just making jokes and talking. Oh my God, it was wonderful. And yes, they make the joke about the web shooters, and they're like, oh my God, Tobey Maguire, that stuff just comes out of you. Does it come out of somewhere else also? It's, oh my God. There's so many great interactions between all of them. I was really happy with the way that was handled. And yeah, overall, this movie, it is packed, and there's a lot to get through. There's probably many things I didn't even manage to mention, but just, oh man, I had a really great time. I had a really great time, and I definitely need to see this thing at least 3 or 4 more times to like feel like I got it all. But yeah, that was Spider-Man No Way Home. If you've seen it, let me know what you think about it. Let me know your theories. Let me know how you feel about the way that it ended. Let me know the kind of things that didn't happen that you kind of wish did happen. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.